Our panel discussion is what is needed to support the circular transition through EPR. I have got a moderator and she will come up. She requested she comes up with all her panelists. Her panelists have 1 minute to introduce themselves. So we're not going to read a whole bio. They will have 1 minute as part of their panel. So as they come up, my moderator is Miss Nobantu Mkhize. A round of applause for her. We heard earlier from Kierra Pettersson, ACEN. Please come up. Patricia, Schröder, I'm looking forward to hearing you on the panel. Circular Energy, NPC. Up next is Shamiela, Reid, Indalo, South Africa, NPC. And lastly, Mandisa Mkhize from ABSA. Mandisa's just done the exercises for us. Ladies and gentlemen, please give them a round of applause. Ladies, you can pick. I think my moderator, you can sit here. Mandisa, you can sit there. Okay. Thank you very much. And then you can share the microphones. You've got one here for you. Thank you very much. Ms. Nobantu, I hand over to you, and your time starts now.
Thank you very much. I would have preferred to stand, if that's okay. I think that way the food gets down quicker. If you don't mind. Okay, I'd like to thank you very much for that introduction and calling us. Is the mic on? Am I audible? 100%. Thank you very much for calling us up. Just before I introduce the panel, I would like to do just a quick intro and then we'll give the panel members a minute to introduce themselves. So, my name is Nobantu Mkhize. I'm an entrepreneur and a certified circular economy instructor and ambassador. Welcome to today's panel discussion on what is needed to support circular transition through extended producer responsibility. We are here to delve deeper into a crucial topic at the intersection of sustainability, economics, and environmental stewardship. In our rapidly evolving world, the concept of the circular economy has gained prominence as a means to addressing pressing global challenges, such as resource scarcity, waste generation, and climate change. At the heart of this transition lies extended producer responsibility, a policy approach that places the onus on producers to manage the entire life cycle of their products from design to disposal. Today, we are privileged to have a distinguished panel representing diverse perspectives and expertise on this subject. Allow me to introduce, or allow the panel members to introduce themselves. And as they introduce themselves, I'd like to invite each of us to also prepare questions. If there is a specific question, perhaps, that you thought of coming through from the sessions this morning and that you feel you'd like to address to one of the panel members, please can you formulate those questions and we will address them during the course of the discussion. Thank you to you. I'd like to start with Ms. Shamiela Reid to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shamiela Reid. I'm the Senior Projects Coordinator at Indalo Inclusive.
Thank you, Shamiela. Over to you, Kierra.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. We met this morning, but my name is Kierra Pettersson. I'm a strategic advisor for the African Circular Economy Network.
Good afternoon. Mandisa Mkhize, Renewable Energy Analyst from ABSA. I sit within the Renewable Energy team, but the broader team is manufacturing, transport and logistics, and I'm excited to be here. We do participate across the value chain, so I'm really excited to hear what has been emerging from these discussions today. Thank you very much.
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm sure most of the room knows who I am. But anyway, I'm Patricia Schröder, the CEO of Circular Energy, a producer responsibility organization, a member organization, and I'm glad to see many of our members here today. And I'm really happy that we can have this discussion and create this awareness that's vitally important to the planet as well as to us as human beings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause, please. Before I ask the first question, I'd actually like to take a moment to congratulate you, Patricia, on your recent appointment as the president of the Institute of Waste Management, South Africa. I think that deserves a round of applause. Thank you. This achievement reflects your dedication and expertise in promoting sustainable waste management practices, and I hope that all of us will be inspired by Patricia's work and her commitment to this journey. Now, going into the business of the day, I'd like to ask my first question, and that will be, sorry, I just lost my place. Okay. So the first question is to you, Patricia. Whilst EPR and carbon offsetting are distinct concepts, how can producers incorporate carbon offsetting into their EPR programs to offset the carbon emissions associated with their product's life cycle? So in other words, how can we develop a whole systems view in terms of EPR rather than looking at it as one small piece within the entire value chain of waste management? Thank you.
Okay, tough question. I'm not a carbon offset specialist. The specialist is sitting over there, my fellow director. So hopefully she will be able to assist us with a lot of these very complex type of questions. So yes, but it is very important to note that although when one looks at a product, you don't just you use it, yes, and it reaches its end of life. It's not just about recycling. Recycling is not the silver bullet. It's one part of a very big chain. Although it's a very important part, because we do need to recover resources for secondary markets, and we do need to contribute to waste minimization. As we heard this morning, landfills are filling up, and so we do need that. But we need to look at the entire chain, right from concept, right from where the materials come from to make the products, where they're mined, what is happening there, to the transport side, to the manufacturing side, to the production side, to the supply chain logistics, right through to the retail, right through to the user, then the post-user. What more can we do to extend the life of those products? What more can we do to reuse, to repair where we can? And I strongly believe in the right to repair. As a consumer, I've come across I've been stonewalled so many times when and I'm not going to mention names here or brand names, but when I go and try and get a gadget fixed or say, no, we can't fix it, you'll have to replace it, and because to repair it costs more than the product itself. We need to relook at these things, because how much waste does that generate, and how much does that contribute to the carbon problem that we have? Every step that I've mentioned has a carbon footprint. It has a water footprint. It has so many different footprints, and our planet has reached the point where it just cannot give any more. Those days of where we can just take and consume, and those days are gone. And one can understand, during the industrial boom, that this was needed at the time, but now we have to change. We have to start looking at it in a different way. We have to look at ways of sharing, ways of, instead of purchasing a product as a service, or these type of things, where we can look at more sustainable things. And the key point that one must take out of this is you can still make good profits. Out of this, your businesses can thrive. In fact, some companies have thrived beyond what based on their old models, just by bringing in new sustainability practices. There is ways that you can do this. There is ways that we can still contribute to the economy, contribute to job creation, contribute to everything, but by doing it the right way. So, yes, carbon offsetting and carbon measuring is one part of it, and it mustn't be forgotten, amongst all the other things that I have spoken about. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you for a very comprehensive answer in terms of how we can, or how we should be applying whole systems approach in terms of managing our waste and creating new business strategies. So it's not just focusing on end of life, but integrating a whole systems approach to our business models. I'd like to pose the second question to you, Shamiela. given that the informal waste sector, as we heard from Sbu before lunch, is often seen as part of a shadow economy, how can extended producer responsibility drive market access and enhance the competitiveness of small, youth and women-owned enterprises in the value chain? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that question. I really wanted to speak to that question at two levels. But I think a lot of people already spoke about sort of the informal sector. And so the two levels that I wanted to speak about that is how do you support entrepreneurs or people working within the informal sector, because not everyone that is in the informal sector necessarily wants to get into the formal sector. But I think a lot of people spoke about sort of the programs that they have to support people in that way, so I won't touch on that. So I'll touch on the second one then, in terms of how do you actually use EPRs to support entrepreneurs, to kind of bring them, people working in the informal sector, looking at the intersectionalities of youth and women, and get them into the formal sector. I think I want to draw on some of the work that we do as an organization, as Indalo, and I think I'm happy we're kind of having this conversation after the previous speaker. We have this saying at Indalo that you can only innovate to the level of your exposure. And that simply means, so people, we can use the waste speakers as an example. How do they actually get from that point of, collecting waste to turning that into a tangible product? So what we do, and I think this is also something that other companies can use utilizing EPR as well, is expose these individuals to innovations within the waste sector, And that's a model that we have at Indalo, so that you could potentially adopt that model and replicate it in your local context as well. So in that way, you are creating sort of this partnership and collaboration that everyone spoke about this morning between the potential or the emerging entrepreneur, but also the existing entrepreneur. You facilitate mentorship, you facilitate skills development and capacity building, but you also facilitate market access in that way, because you could have a group of emerging entrepreneurs that actually feed into this already existing entrepreneur. So, facilitating that supply and demand of the value chain as well. So I think I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you very much. And I think the one thing that we actually touched on was one of the barriers to uptake from moving from an informal sector to a formalized sector is lack of understanding of the regulation. And often when we mention the word regulation, people just see a stick. We all think, oh my goodness, they're coming to get me. Whereas I think it's important to also invest in advocacy programs where people can understand the benefits of actually transitioning from an informal sector to a formalized sector, because that essentially would allow our downstream actors to actually start to move upstream, so that we don't have this concentration of people sitting downstream and remaining downstream, but we can actually start to see companies and individuals and entrepreneurs such as Spoo starting to move up the downstream within the starting to move upstream within the waste economy value chain. Thank you very much for that answer, Shamiela. Kierra, during a 2023 interview, one of your colleagues from ASIN, Jocelyn, discussed Africa's work on ultimate producer responsibility for second-hand goods imported from Europe. According to Jocelyn, current EPR systems are ineffective due to weak governance, lack of data and infrastructure. In this regard, how can African governments, including ours, and international partners collaborate to ensure effective implementation and enforcement of ultimate producer responsibility for second-hand goods?
Sure, thank you for that question. As mentioned, Jocelyn is a non-executive director of the African Circular Economy Network. And I think a lot of what she speaks to in that is touches on both what my colleague said today, but specifically Patricia, is that really the functional requirement of this is to look at everything from the actual system. So if you're looking at EPR, yes, it's important to look at what happens within South Africa's borders and what we import in and who's responsible for it there. South Africa, when compared to the rest of the African continent, is doing better in terms of EPR than the rest of the continent, and we do have pretty solid infrastructure and we're working towards it. But we are not in a vacuum, and we are not in a vacuum compared to the rest of the world either. What UPR, or ultimate producer responsibility, looks at is basically trying to figure out how to build deeper communication patterns between what gets imported, and specifically in the secondhand market in Africa, and where it's coming from. We lose around, I'm just looking at the figure here, it's 380 million euros a year in African economies from EPR fees associated with secondhand electronics alone. That's just for electronics that are imported from Europe. So that means that we are then bearing the burden again of products and materials that are brought back into Africa, probably using African resources and minerals, sent to Europe or sent to China to be made, used, and then brought back to us, and most of them don't even work anyway. So we get stuck with something that doesn't work, and then we are just over and over and over again bearing the burden of underdevelopment as a result of how European economies work. I think that is a very clearly and abundantly not right. There should be basically what UPR is trying to make an argument for is attaching the EPR fee to where it's coming from as well. So it doesn't stop when that product leaves Europe. It stays with it, and that stays with it in perpetuity until its end of life. So that covers its second life, its third life, and then only when it's ready to be kind of dismantled and made not what it was anymore, then it kind of is dealt with. But those fees then that get brought in from Europe can be used in Africa for infrastructure development, for skills development, for capacity building that is drastically lacking in the continent. We have a really, really incredible informal economy that deals with our waste and brings our recycling up to pretty laudable standards. But with specific types of products, especially electronics, there's so much technical capacity that's needed to know how to dismantle it appropriately, to know how to use it, to know how to correctly send the materials certain directions. And that is basically what the hope of a UPR is trying to channel the fees that are coming from other places into really well-resourced parts of the African continent, and basically developing our skills and capacity from there. But yeah, essentially it's looking at models that already exist in Africa, trying to support the informal economy and building it up through external fees development. Yeah.
Thank you very much. On that note, I didn't know that Tunisia was actually the first country on the continent to introduce some sort of organized EPR system. I initially thought it was Rwanda and Kenya, but I was surprised when I did the research to learn that Tunisia has been ahead of the game for quite some time, or in the game for quite some time. Thank you very much, Kierra. I'd like to pose, I think, using that example specifically, and we heard from Reid earlier on. Globally, I'd like to pose my question to you, Mandisa. Globally, we're seeing the emergence of new trade blocs, obviously as a result of critical supply shortages and all sorts of risks that emanated from the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, the emergence of new blocs, such as the US-led Mineral Security Plan and the BRICS +6, have led to a noticeable trend of the localization of manufacturing. And I think that speaks to what Reid is doing. The manufacturing of critical raw materials to help mitigate supply chain risks and promote regional development. How do institutional investors view these developments, and what strategies can funders employ to leverage EPR in support of localization strategies for critical resources in the secondary market? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Nobantu. So in our space, we are, closely observing what's been emerging from the South African Renewable Energy Master Plan. We are ensuring that, we do understand the opportunities that have been outlined through the plan, and this is, across the solar PV sector, wind, as well as batteries. So as a financier, we have to ensure, we are, keeping abreast with all those developments. But I would say as a bank, we have financed at least 4 gigawatts of renewable energy through the auction program. And what the auction program has achieved for us as South Africa is to de-risk the renewable energy sector as a whole. We've seen from bid window 1 to bid window, the recent bid window round, the tariff prices have come down significantly. And that to us, shows what kind of principles that the EPR can also look to thrive within the South African renewable energy space. But I think it's also important to understand that all thriving sectors are driven by stable demand. We are already seeing a lot of the PV installations across the country. That demand is quickly building up for what we are preparing for the waste management sector. So I think, and then looking at the regulatory landscape, how enabling is that framework for incumbents, right? We do understand, the IPPs, economies of scale do favor them in playing in South Africa. But what does that look like for, incumbents that are looking to play at that scale, but ensuring that those are, localized strategies, but also what do we do, with skills development to ensure that the skills are, transferred and kept within the country.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. A round of applause, I think, for the first round. Thank you. Is there anyone in the audience with a specific question, a follow-up question perhaps to what we've discussed? We'd love to get your interaction, your views, your follow-up questions. Are there any questions from the floor? No questions from the floor? Okay. I'm quite surprised. All right. Let's go back. Let's come back to you, Shamiela. Implementing EPR in conjunction with enterprise development and supply development regulations could contribute to fostering the inclusion and sustainable advancement of small youth and women-owned businesses. What programs can be used to help transition downstream players to upstream participants in the waste economy value chain? I know you touched on it a bit, but just to go deeper into the kind of programs that we can start to think about implementing in our businesses and in our organizations.
Okay, I think essentially when you talk about sort of transitioning an enterprise from downstream to upstream, you're actually looking at growth and scale, right? And I think there's a couple of things, and I will speak from sort of the in-dialogue perspective again as well, and the kind of work that we do. So when we support entrepreneurs, we always say that entrepreneurs needs to be given a basket of support mechanisms. And usually what you find in this space is that an enterprise development support program would only offer training skills or skills development or capacity building, or whatever the case may be. But entrepreneurs actually need some kind of funding, and especially if they're at starter level, grant funding to actually translate those sort of capacity building skills into tangible results. So I think sort of having that basket of support mechanisms, looking at the technical business development support, but now we are talking about enterprises in the green economy, also looking at supporting entrepreneurs on the sort of green economy aspects of their work, the understanding climate change, understanding sustainable development goals, the relevance of that for their business or whatever the case may be. Doing one-on-one mentorship with those enterprises as well, because you won't necessarily, enterprises, they grow at different scales and the needs are different as well. So, having that sort of one-on-one mentorship with them, providing them with the financial support. Okay, I can project. That's fine. Okay. Yeah, so I said financial support, and I think the South African context really requires you to provide that financial support in the form of grants. And here we are specifically looking at people that are kind of being socially and economically excluded, and we're looking at your people in the informal economy, we're looking at your youth, we're looking at your women, you're looking at your people in your township areas, you're looking at your people in your rural economies as well, right? And then, of course, as a business grows and becomes sort of a growth phase, accelerator phase, you can look at sort of blended finance mechanisms and whatever the case may be. And then also, how do you kind of support them to do in terms of market access and whatever the case may be. But I think as people that work in the space that has enterprise development support programs, I think we need to think about once an entrepreneur is actually done with your program, how do you then play a facilitative role to take them to the next stage? To link them up with potential partners, to link them up with potential investors or whatever the case may be. And sometimes it could be something simple as showcasing this enterprise, be it on your social media platforms, be it at an event where someone might just see them and be like, wow, I find this interesting, let me take this up further. And I think, again, in the context of South Africa, we need to do a bit of hand-holding with entrepreneurs at some point. So we also have a graduation model. So our incubation model looks at supporting entrepreneurs from ideation stage up until acceleration stage. And not each and every enterprise is going to go through a graduation model. But some enterprises, given how they grow within the program, does call for that. Is your incubation model flexible enough? Not so long ago, we introduced a program called the Indalo Extend. So for example, maybe your incubation program is 10 months, but you need that additional support to get you to the next sort of phase of your business. We introduced this extended program so that you can just support the business to grow there. We have one of our entrepreneurs, she actually collects used cooking oil from spaza shops and whatever the case may be. And she actually develops hygiene products, so like soap and detergents and whatever the case may be. If it was not for that extended program, she would not have a very viable market now, which is an international market. She has a partnership with an organization based in Germany. She's now supplying to Macro and whatever the case may be. But that sort of extended program really helped her to get further in the game. So I think essentially, it's just about also the flexibility of the program that you have when developing that program, looking at sort of a bit of hand-holding the entrepreneur as well, and providing them with sort of a basket of opportunities as well. That would essentially get them to that growth and scale.
Thank you very much, Shamiela. I think that's quite important, understanding that it's not a one-size-fits-all. So when designing ESD programs and supply development programs, it's to actually think about what is the ultimate outcome at the end of the program? What is the longevity and the sustainability of the business that we are supporting and incubating? I'd like to come to you as a specialist in EPR. I didn't know there's multiple models for EPR. So there's a mono EPR and there's a mono PRO, producer responsibility organization, and a multi-producer responsibility organization. Now, each of these models have distinct features and sectoral applications. In South Africa, which local industries are most suitable for mono PROs, focusing on targeted waste streams like electronics and packaging? And which industries could benefit from a multi-PRO approach, allowing diverse stakeholders like plastics and paper industries to collaborate effectively on waste management? I think for now, I've definitely only seen mostly multi-PROs. I think the only mono PRO could possibly be Petco because they are focused on the plastic sector. So in your perspective, looking at the kind of industries that are represented in our economies, what does the future of producer responsibility organizations look like, and what sort of models can be suitable for which type of industry or which type of sector? Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, that's a very difficult one because that is also policy driven. Okay, so the policymakers in the room would have to contribute here as well. But in terms of, when you speak mono, it's a PRO that looks at just one sector, and they specialize just in that sector. And you'll mostly find that in the plastics and the paper and plastics sector. So yes, Petco focuses on PET, Polyco on polypropylene, Fiber Circle is all just paper and cardboard. Whereas in terms of, and there's reason for that in South Africa, and that is because these sectors were already implementing a voluntary type of EPR scheme prior to the publication of the regulation. So there was voluntary systems in place, voluntary collection, and where the big players like Coca-Cola and all of them would already put money into into these organizations. So it was already existing prior to the publication of the EPR regulations. So it made sense for them to continue, and those mostly were for the bigger sort of companies, bigger producers. Then all the smaller producers came in and joined them were within that sector. After the publication of the regulations, obviously it's free for every sector to develop their own sort of scheme. And so circular energy was founded initially as an electrical and electronic equipment sector PRO. It then expanded into lighting and packaging, and we just focus on the product packaging. We don't do the traditional packaging as Petco or Polyco, those guys. We don't do the big packaging management. So we do our members' products and the packaging that their products are imported in or manufactured with. So this product packaging, and then we expanded because the demand was there. That we were getting inquiries. The demand was there to look at the portable battery sector. We then registered for the portable batteries. We registered for lighting and lighting equipment because a lot of our EEE members were also doing lighting. And then in terms of the lubricant oil, we were also approached to assist in the lubricant oil sector. So, and that is because, a bit of bragging rights here is that Circular Energy had already set a very good foundation on the expertise and in-house expertise and knowledge on managing a scheme, and that we were doing it successfully. There have been a lot of failures, as Jeremiah will tell you. There's PROs that have not made it, and that is for various reasons. So, but anyway, so in terms of the benefits, it makes sense for a Petco to exist with Coca-Cola as its main producer member, because they've been running this, as I said before, prior, and that is part of their take-back system of taking back bottles and whether it's glass or PET, it was part of their systems, and they've just expanded on that. And so the benefits there is, yes, join where everyone is there. You can all collaborate together and work on the same issues and problems together as a collective. The benefit with electronics and what we do is it's also the benefit of a collective. Even though it's different electronic products, it's still electrical and electronic. So, and with a multi sort of sector approach, you can actually have strength in many ways, and it can be beneficial, cross-functional benefits that you can realize from that. So, and it's entirely up to each producer. And, the freedom of choice is there. They can decide whether they want to go wherever they want. And but again, it's based on, in South Africa, it's based on performance rather than which sectors you represent at this point in time. So I don't know if that's answered everything there. But I'm sure if you have questions in the audience, there might be different questions. I'm happy to answer that.
Thank you very much. With that, are there any specific questions? And I think that comes from the point of understanding that there's different specializations or different industries. Some industries can be highly specialized, so where those industries are feeling like perhaps I don't really have a space. If I look at the current PRO landscape, perhaps I need to partner or develop a system where there's a specific focus on the kind of products or the kind of outputs that I have. Does that then warrant the establishment of a specific or a mono PRO? Do we have the volumes? How can we make it viable? How can we test, or where are the best places in which we can test these various PRO models? Because it is something that that can be done in industry. Are there any comments or questions from the floor? Right, I'm going to bring the gym lady back. I'm going to bring her back. I think on skills development, Kierra, EPR obviously plays a vital role, a pivotal role as part of South Africa's just energy transition, which aims to ensure a fair and equitable shift to sustainable energy practices. Critical and globally, this is not just a South African issue, but critical skills gaps are prominent in technical expertise related to renewable energy and even EPR as well, technologies and waste management systems, while other skills gaps pertain to stakeholder engagement and community outreach, again, the advocacy and the reskilling. What are the training and educational programs that are required, that you, in your view, are required to equip individuals with technical skills needed to implement EPR policies effectively, particularly in the context of renewable energy and waste management?
Oh, I mean, I think that there are definitely people in this room who would know the specific answer to this question a bit better than me, but I can give it a go. Mandisa included probably. But yeah, I mean, there's so many different things. I think that from a hard skills perspective, a lot of the just transition work means looking at what skills availability we already have as a country that has a really deep mining sector and energy generation sector and coal sector, and trying to look at where the shortest linkages are in terms of what skills people have and how they can be applied so that there isn't that loss in the system as we go through transition. How to do that is obviously up for massive debate. I think that functionally a lot of it needs to be in communication with the different unions and seeing what works best for them. So I'm hesitant to give specific examples, but I mean, there's so much around even pretty simple and straightforward agriculture to, for instance, green hydrogen job transition can make sense because a lot of it does require the same skills dynamic. So I think a lot of it isn't necessarily about completely overhauling what skills capacity we need, but rather looking at other sectors and understanding where there is transference that's possible. I mean, I can speak about my own work a little bit more specifically here. I studied philosophy. I wasn't not trained as a circular economist. That didn't exist when I was in university, but you can look at the shortest linkages between how to communicate, how to write, how to speak, and try and find ways to apply that into a different sector. Obviously, that's much harder when you're looking at something like creating renewable energy, but it doesn't mean that those linkages aren't there. So I think, to answer from my perspective more specifically, I think it needs just a systems analysis of understanding where those linkages are first, rather than a complete overhaul. But that also means a ton of effort and emphasis on how our TVET colleges work, a lot more just bottom-up approaches to, like you said, community development and stakeholder engagement, and trying to figure out how to be supportive of those smaller communities too.
Thank you very much. I think I love the fact that you mentioned TVET colleges, because there's a lot of conversation starting to happen around the reinvestment and reinvigoration of our TVET colleges. And I think it would be important for some of the people in this room with that kind of vision and capacity to start understanding what TVET colleges are existing in our communities and where can we start to develop and nurture skills. And maybe as a follow-up comment to that, the industry, and maybe you can also, Spoemeister, weigh in here. In your experience, to me, it feels like the industry is failing to attract different skills. When we talk about the waste economy, a lot of us think straight to either policy and regulation, or we think about waste pickers. But there's a whole in-between of a need for blockchain, a need for data. I mean, one of the issues that was raised in Jocelyn's interview was the fact that we don't have data. We still in this day and age, especially in South Africa in SADC, making decisions in a vacuum because no one is investing in creating the right kind of data systems. So, and not to cancel out what Spoo was saying in terms of investment, but not all of us can go and buy a waste trolley for a waste picker. At some point, we need to start to attract different skills. We need to start to develop different capability and technical capabilities to come into the waste sector and start to develop the systems that we need to ensure that it is a thriving sector. I'm moving because I see a question at the back. Please.
Can I run?
Thank you very much for bringing that up. So, Stefan from Reid. You brought up the point of data and blockchain. I think it's something very, very valid, and perhaps we can bring it up as another discussion point. Within our interaction with PFFE, GWIS, SAWIC, the various different waste officers from government and also from the private sector, the issue is not data, it's validated data. And data that is relevant in the movement of products to waste to new either disposal, energy recovery, or landfill, and the reasoning behind that. So I think we have a lot of data, but it hasn't been validated and it hasn't been placed correctly, uniformly in South Africa in one system. So we have different reporting systems for the Western Cape compared to Johannesburg, compared to KZN, because we're reporting into IPWIS, which is a Western Cape's waste reporting system. We're reporting into GWIS in Gauteng, and in KZN we have to report up to SAWIC. Now the funny part now comes, IPWIS will have different waste codes and classifications that we are actually reporting against in GWIS. However, they're all reporting into SAWIC. And now comes the best part. Because we are recycling and recovering, we can only report under one part. Because when we are reporting as a recycler, first we are recovering the products, then we recycle them. If we have 2 registrations on GWIS, when it then gets reported up to SAWIC, it will be doubled as volumes, not as integrated volumes. So I think the question that I want to bring out of this is, where do the PROs believe, or is there a space for PROs and the manufacturers to bring validated data for their members and their supply chains into that reporting system? Thank you.
Thank you for the valid question, because ultimately, if we can't measure,
Please take a mic on the podium and I'll use this one for the floor. Thank you.
I was saying that if we can't measure and validate it, then it didn't happen. If you're not in the picture, you weren't there, quite simply. Thank you. Dr. Motezo, your question?
Good afternoon, everyone. Am I audible? Okay, great. I want to leech on a comment you've mentioned, Madam Moderator, in terms of the skills component. From my experience, there is certainly a need for these conversations to trickle down to your secondary schools, tertiary institutions, because these are some of the individuals we'll be working with in our small businesses or within our decision-making institutions. So I've been finding it difficult to see a set of skills that can appreciate waste as a resource. Rather, waste continues to be seen as that smelly, icky thing. I'll get into the business because I need to make money. And so the beautiful conversations we are having, to what extent can we have them trickle into our tertiary institutions? Because at the end of the day, you want to have employees or, let me say, like-minded thinkers within the firm who can appreciate that waste is such a wide beast. You can really optimize on the values that it has to offer. It's a comment, yet a question at the same time. How can it trickle? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kierra, would you mind taking that last question from Dr. Motezo? Because you mentioned TVET. So, and Patricia, if you can take the first question. Thank you very much. Patricia.
Okay, yeah, so a very valid point brought up, and in terms of the data reporting and so forth. So as Circular Energy, we've identified the various gaps, and working together with our members, we are putting together systems and data collection methodologies to be able to report real validated information. So we are currently busy with a software management system where our producer members would be reporting directly in on exactly what they bring into the country, the volumes, the types, the weights, and so forth. And it can even go to the point where a serial number can be put behind that product. So there's serial number tracking of all the products at the beginning of that product's life. And then as it goes through life, we can monitor as it comes back, where we have, at our service partners, have have got serial number readers at the waste facilities that they then can read the serial numbers coming back, and we can then compare that to what was brought in. If there are any duplications, we know, oops, there's something not right here. There's somebody that's got a fake product out there while the real product is still out in service, or it comes back and the serial number doesn't match. Then we know we've got grey imports to deal with. We've got a whole lot of other things to deal with, and that's real. That's what data management is there for, so that you can manage these things and track these things to be able to make a real difference to every aspect of what we are trying to achieve. Not just, the reporting targets to the department. That's one part of it, but we want to go one step further, where you start looking at real data in terms of the products we're dealing with. And we can even then, it'll be beneficial for our members, because they would then be able to track how their products are performing out there, how their products are they coming back early? Why? Ask the questions. Why are these things coming back early? What's the conditions like these type of things that we be able to get real life data to see, and also make improvements on. So that system is going live now in the next month or two. We've been working very hard with the developers. It's an in-house product, and I think this is something that we'll also invite the department to come and have a look and look at this system, so that there's always room for improvement wherever we go. We learn from each other. So I think these are the type of tools that we need to embrace. But again, it's one thing reporting, but reporting for what?
Yeah.
What is the outcome? You need to have something and the outcome that you can be able to take action against, or to improve something on.
Yeah.
So I think that is everything. I think I've said everything. My brain's still going.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Kierra.
Sure, thank you. Dr. Mkhize, I think you probably have your own ideas about how to answer your own question as well, which I'd love to chat about more. But I can speak from my perspective and from ASIN's, which, I think really simply it's just about curriculum development. ASIN is working with the University of the Free State on waste to resource curriculum development, which I think is really important. I think there's still a consistent narrative of not really understanding where waste goes, or that waste is even really a thing. I think is something else that we need to overhaul, like that in reality, nothing just goes away. I think that's something that really simply needs to be addressed, probably much more before tertiary education. The idea that, waste is no longer our responsibility once it leaves the house, kind of thing. But so I think we can have a much larger conversation about our education curriculum in South Africa, but I think there should be so much more emphasis already on climate, on circular economy, on all of these components. And I think giving people just a really, really simple way to communicate with it. I think that there's a tendency in the circular economy world to be, and in my own fault as well, quite technocratic when we speak. It makes the world feel really inaccessible to people. I think really, really basically there can be conversations had with kids about what's happening with their waste, what the magic of compost and all these other things, that there's life to be created from these things that we generally just disregard. And I think maybe simplifying it down a lot more would be my impulse. And then once that gets to tertiary level, hopefully that's been kind of communicated and addressed through kids first, and people have this grasp, like you say, that it's not just something smelly and gross that you don't want to touch or deal with or think about, but rather something that's life-giving and a resource and a feedstock and all these other things. I hope that answers.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Shamiela, you'd like to support that?
Yeah, no, I just want to add three things very quickly. I think you spoke about skills development and how essential that is, but I think you can have skills development, but if you don't have places to actually place people with the skills, I think it becomes problematic. And I think we kind of find that in the African context and in the South African context, that is the reality, because you have a lot of graduates and maybe they don't have the right skills, maybe they do, but there are so many of them are still sitting without work. The other thing was on the universities and tertiary level. So from a sort of entrepreneurial space, you are seeing a lot of universities entering into partnerships with entrepreneurs. And these are student entrepreneurs to give them the platform to test their innovations, to test their concepts, to serve as demonstration sites. So there is sort of that space that is where you see sort of interaction happening at the tertiary level, and you are seeing starting to grow more and more. And then I think the last thing was on the data. I do think having the data is still a problem, and that might not be at your businesses or private sector that is at commercial scale. But small businesses struggle to gather data. Some of them don't have the systems in place. Some of them don't have the capacity to maintain the systems. So I think from a small business level perspective, data, the collection of that data, maintaining that data, managing that data is still a significant challenge.
Thank you very much for that follow-up, Shamiela. My last question, because we believe we've got less than 5 minutes to wrap up, is to you, Mandisa. Considering the existing regulatory frameworks and instruments that govern the fee structures and recovery methodologies, what are the key areas in the EPR value chain that could facilitate a circular economy transition while offering private investors, including venture capitalists and angel investors, a favorable balance between risk and potential for disruptive innovation? Because a lot of the times, again, with funding, we hear, oh, there is money, people are there, they want to put money, but they don't know where to put it. So where do we, within the value chain of this economy that we're talking about, where do you think, whether it's an institutional funder, an angel investor, a venture capitalist, where do you think they need to start looking when it comes to opportunities at the nexus of risk and opportunity? Where can we start looking? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll just speak to, the commercial banks, or at least what we are doing as ABSA. We are one of the four, at least few banks that are issuing a concessionary rated solution, both to renewable energy end users, but as well as installers or all the companies that sit along the renewable energy value chain. And how this enables companies is they're able to access finance at relatively cheaper prices than they normally would. The scheme is governed by the South African Reserve Bank, and again, it is to drive uptake of renewable energy solutions. However, as we impart the EPR framework to installers, producers, we also try to ensure that we offer affordable finance. And I think that's one way the commercial banks are trying to at least tackle the challenges that exist. Finance is expensive, but how do we, as I think Dr. Nagesh did mention, they're working with Siapambili that's looking to install a renewable energy solution. But how can we as a bank offer that, solution at a cheaper rate for where the SME is at its cycle? So that's what we are doing as a bank currently. And I think if you look at broadly what we've been able to achieve, within the MME space, we've been able to impart at least, 600 million to support SMME customers.
Thank you very much. Excuse me. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. But before we close off, any last closing comment, question? One at the back. You've got 30 seconds, otherwise.
Okay, where is that person? Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. So 30 seconds is fine for me because I can talk very fast. I've known to be my second hobby is auctioneer. Okay, I want to circle back to something that Patricia said, and it touched very much on something, obviously, that she knows that's very close to my heart, which is the carbon decarbonization principles. And to fully fledge that answer, I'd like to indicate something to you, that if you look at our drive for green energy, and I'm going to give you a simple example. If I take an industry, any industry, I take a factory, and I have a look at their carbon footprint, their emissions, if you look at the circle, 70% of that emissions is coming from the energy, right? We all understand that. 70, 71, 75, that'll be the carbon footprint because it's the consumption of the brown energy of Eskom, right? The remaining percentage is from the resourcing of either consumables or production, emissions, and waste. Now, if one had to look at the factor, when we're saying we wanted to get carbon reduction, everybody's going to go and challenge and they're going to charge for the green energy, right? Right, 70% of it. The tonnage factor for energy is 1.08 CO2e avoided. Do you know what it is for landfill? If I avoid something going to landfill, if I can take a mill, I can take an industry, and I halt the disposal of any type of wet waste on that, does anybody know what the factor is? It's 8.9. So can you see that little 30% in that circle of your carbon footprint? That 80% is what 70%, all of us, me included, PV panels, batteries, avoided brown energy. But from that very small sector, from that emissions factor, from that landfill, that's where we can get the impact. And that's where the funding, because I've been listening to the ladies talking about the skills development and the funding and the structures and that is where we can actually attract that funding. Because for a much lesser capital input, we can get bigger bang for our buck if we say we want to reduce carbon emissions. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you very much for that. In closing, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to our respective panel members for your contribution and thought-provoking insights. Our discussion has shed light on the critical role of extended producer responsibility in advancing the circular economy and fostering sustainable development in South Africa. We have also learned that EPR is not merely a regulatory requirement, but a powerful catalyst for change, for driving innovation, collaboration, and inclusivity across the sectors. From financial institutions facilitating sustainable investment to non-profit organizations empowering entrepreneurs and PRO companies implementing effective strategies, we are all connected, and each stakeholder has a pivotal role to play in shaping a more resilient and equitable future for South Africa. As we conclude, let us reflect on the key takeaways from today's dialogue. It is important for the private sector to collaborate and partner with producer responsibility organizations to advance EPR implementation and circular economy initiatives. There is a continued need for innovative financing mechanisms and support structures to help integrate small youth and women-owned businesses into the EPR value chain. And lastly, EPR has the potential to create new opportunities for job creation, economic growth, and environmental sustainability in South Africa and Africa as a whole. As we leave this conference today, let us carry forward the spirit of Ubuntu, knowing that it is through our collective efforts that we can truly transform the world for the better. Thank you.
Thank you.